Hello, and welcome back to the BlackGirlGamers Online Summit. My name is Deja Kirk, or you can call me Jade Valkyrie, and I'll be your moderator for this panel where we explore what gaming studios can do to consider disabled gamers in the development process so that accessibility can become more of a forethought rather than an afterthought. So, without further ado, let's bring on our panelists today. Hello, you wonderful, wonderful panelists. Thank you so much for joining us for this Accessibility Beyond the Screen panel. I'm so excited to be here as a Black Girl Gamer member myself for this awesome, awesome panel. So I will have you all introduce yourselves and we'll go in clockwise order. So let's start with Olivier.
Hi, everyone. I'm Olivier Nori. I co-founded Games Accessibility Hub, which is a company dedicated to creating a space for game makers to be able to meet accessibility specialists and also builders with disabilities. And that for 1 year now, and hopefully it's going on for a long time.
Awesome. Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura. My pronouns are she, her. I have for the past 4 years been running a video series weekly called Accessibility, trying to teach introductory concepts of video game accessibility across a broad range of subjects. I also run a video game accessibility podcast called Control Alt Access, and I do video game accessibility consulting on a number of topics.
Wonderful. And Steven.
Good morning. My name is Steve Spawn. My pronouns are he, him. I am the senior director at BlackGirlGamers. I have been running around the internet raising awareness for disabilities and for charity for about 20 years now. BlackGirlGamers is one of the big charities who helps gamers with disabilities be able to play in video games, so you may not always see our work. We're often working in the background with developers to help them learn how to design more accessibly and to be able to meet all the challenges that are out there for gamers with disabilities, as well as bringing disabled gamers into the charity itself and be able to find the controllers that they need to get into these awesome worlds developed by creators.
Awesome. And by the way, my pronouns are she, they. So first, before we dive into the nitty gritty, I'd like for everyone to kind of briefly explain more about your work that you do and your experience in the accessibility space. So we'll go in reverse order this time. So Steven, tell us more about BlackGirlGamers.
Yeah, BlackGirlGamers largely is a charity trying to do way too much with a lot of people with very big hearts. So our primary focus is meeting with individuals who come to us and say, hey, I have this challenge. I have one arm, one hand. I have the inability to see the screens from far away. I have quadriplegia. A number of conditions, I can't list them all, that are preventing me from enjoying a game the way that maybe everyone else does. And here's the games I'd really love to play. And we go, great, that sounds cool. We put them through our peer counseling process, and we say, okay, great, here's some controller options. Which one do you think works for you? We work with them. It takes us 8 to 16 hours to figure out what each individual would do and would want. And we give them those controllers thanks to the donations that come in to help support and change the lives of gamers with disabilities. Along the way, we realized that hardware only goes so far, that in fact you also need to work with the developer side of the community in order to make that change. And back 20 years ago, there weren't wonderful individuals like Laura out there knocking down doors and making people do things accessibly. So we started writing Includification, which was our fun paper that told devs how to do this. And then we eventually turned it into a course at accessible.games where developers can go and can learn how to develop games more successfully for gamers with disabilities. Now, we can't get every gamer with every disability into every game, but we can help developers get the tools they need to bring as many people to the table as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And Laura, besides, knocking down doors for game studios to do things accessibility wise, tell us more about your consulting work.
So I have done consulting for a number of companies, very few I can talk about currently because video game development timelines are hugely lengthy, but I can talk in broad strokes. I've done stuff for both indie teams and big budget studios, largely for me in terms of a number of conditions I've got. I've done consulting on ways that video games can be more accessible to autistic players. There's not a lot being done deliberately in that realm at the moment. I'm trying to push for things like making non-verbal subtext more accessible in narrative-heavy games, making sure that sensory spikes, be they visually or auditory, can be managed. As someone who has chronic motion sickness, I do a lot of stuff with various game developers on how to mitigate motion sickness. I do a lot of consulting on ADHD and how to manage barriers for players who, like myself, might have issues with memory, focus, attentiveness, and how those can overlap with various game needs. I have aphantasia, which means that I struggle with visual memory and imagination, and that causes a bunch of barriers that I have consulted with developers on. But beyond that, some of what I do is just doing entry-level consulting for developers that have no idea where to start on accessibility, where they're like, here is where my game is at right now. Can you give me an entry point of what are some easy things I could start on? What are some ambitious things I could aim for? What areas right now do I need to be like talking to people in, because like which groups of people do you foresee might have barriers with the current game and that we should go seek out feedback from? And much as the same as my public facing content, it's just trying to get developers from I don't know where to start to having a place to start and knowing where else to be looking for the things that I can't personally offer them.
Yeah. That is fantastic. And Olivier, tell us more about Game Accessibility Hub and what you do there.
Yes, so basically there is this observation that lots and the wide majority of developers have absolutely no idea about what is accessibility and even what is disability, what is a disabled player actually. So the very first step is to raise awareness, try to make them understand the needs of players with disabilities, what it means in terms of features, maybe in terms of game design, visual design, and so on. So we try to raise this awareness through training first, trying to expose individual situations to show how it works for people. Surprisingly, not many game developers are aware of the needs of the players. It's something that is relatively new in the field. So we try to improve that and try to also to bring specific expertise, because first, disabilities are so diverse. There is most situation per person, and you can't easily generalize everything. Laura mentioned a few examples of disabilities that she can represent, sort of. There are so many others, and so we try to that diversity, try to find the common grounds, but also the differences, and that's basically the work we do at the very early stage of a project. And then we try to inject expertise, specialized expertise. We can't hold every bit of knowledge that needs to be understood. So we try to find the person or someone who has to help and not going for the game, but trying to improve things. Try to respect the sky and the budget, so in order to make it as smooth as possible.
Yeah. And speaking of like improving things bit by bit, especially with companies, what are some things that you all have seen that companies are doing right now in the industry regarding accessibility? We'll go to Laura first for this one.
The big thing I would say right now is that the industry is in a period where the most exciting thing for me isn't necessarily the new steps being taken by companies, but it is the standardization that we're finally starting to see. We're starting to see a degree of the industry paying attention to what everyone else is doing and trying to learn best practices from each other. And I think that is the thing that's happening right now that is accelerating accessibility the most. We see this in terms of things like Xbox making their accessibility guidelines pretty easily accessible to learn from. We see this with the adoption of things like co-pilot mode equivalents across consoles, accessibility store tags. Right now, a lot of big game publishers that have been praised for being accessible are putting resources out there to go, this is how we did what we did, here's what you can learn from. And that has been a really exciting recent development to see.
And Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree. In order to get remappable keys into video games, that was actually where we were, where everybody goes into a game and immediately changes all the buttons to wherever they'd like to go. That was something you had to fight for, and that's not a thing anymore, right? That's as common as subtitles now, and I think that Laura's absolutely right. As we continue to move forward, this stuff is becoming more and more commonplace. So what's exciting is that I'm finding, as an advocate, that I'm spending less and less time arguing with developers that they should do accessibility and more telling them how to do accessibility. And that was a very exciting pendulum swing. I know for the viewing audience that might be kind of the boring answer, but it's the true answer. Laura and I have spent a lot of time back-to-back ballroom fighting people to just pay attention to disabled community members, and now we don't have to. Now it's like, all right, you believe in us, cool, now here's how you do it. And that to me has been the chief crowning achievement lately, and also games sort of there's beginning to be a little bit of competitiveness between the industry juggernauts, which I'm really enjoying seeing. Things like descriptive audio for the blind coming in, which has been like, why if you're blind, why would you want to play games? That's silly. That's like the quadriplegic man trying to dance. All these kinds of weird jumps that they would make to justify not putting in accessibility. But now the studios are like, all right, so you put in 100 options, watch this, and then they put in 200 in the next game. So it's really great. I'm enjoying that. And I'm enjoying not seeing the backsliding. So Forza in the Xbox arena, they're very guilty of doing really good, and then the next game they go, we don't need that many options, and then they cut a whole bunch of them. And then the advocates go, no, put them back. And so the next game they put even more in. And so we don't see that as much anymore. Now we're seeing where they're like, all right, you know what? These are important. People do care. And then finally, I'd say to Laura's point, people like Ubisoft are putting out statistics that we can lean on to say, look, 90% of people who turn on subtitles leave them on. 95% of people use remappable keys and do not leave the default options. Lots of people like easy mode. Like, there are lots of things out there that we can argue now with statistics and figures that aren't just us saying, no, trust us, it's real. We know it's real.
It's fantastic. And Olivier.
Yeah, I totally agree with what has been said. And there is this snowball effect where you have games that will push the limits further. And it's an industry where everyone is looking at each other, trying to reproduce or trying to be inspired by what's been done already. So you have games that have made really significant advances. I'm thinking about The Last of Us Part 2, for instance, which was really a landmark in accessibility in 2020. And it was the first AAA game in an open world that was playable and actually beatable by someone with no sight and no human assistance. So this was quite a feat at the time. It was the first one. It was a really significant push. And then later we had Forza Motorsport that is actually playable by someone with no sight and no human assistance. That's another. And now we know it's possible. We could have doubts before, but now we know it's possible. So it's an example set by these studios for others to follow. And that's really exciting to see it's happening. And we need to pay tribute to people like Stephen and Laura, who have been in this field for years and years now, and who have pioneered it. And they did the heavy lifting, trying to against all odds. And it was very... it was not that obvious to believe in this previously, but that's where we are now, and hopefully the future is bright for us.
Yeah, and building upon that, Olivier, from your experience, what do you think is like hindering some of these efforts? I know that we're getting like some of that extra like steps forward,
Yeah.
but what do you think would be hindering some of these progress for more accessible games from other places besides, I guess, Forza and that team?
Yeah, I think things happen is because when people are aware simply of what needs to be done, and they are prepared for that. They have budgeted this, and they have planned the work that needs to be done. It's not necessarily expensive, not necessarily difficult, but it has to be prepared, and you can't improvise that, because when you reach maybe like a few months before release, you can't put anything new, even if it's the smallest tweak in colors or maybe the location of a button or whatever. So the lack of preparation comes from the lack of awareness from the very early stages of projects. Of course, when you have a smaller game, if you are indie dev or maybe a small team of developers, it's way easier to put changes. You have less constraints. But when you make a AAA game, of course, you have a huge pressure on release dates, on features that you are allowed to put into. So I think really it's a question of preparation. And since we have these very lengthy production cycles in gaming, you can have maybe 5 or 6 years between the idea, the initial idea, and the final product. So what we have learned 5 years ago is only happening in games now. So that's part of the issue, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know that we talked about this, Laura, I know we talked about this, but this is a question for everybody, so feel free to answer, about what are the issues currently around the industry's approach and like how the industry views like the disabled gamers. So I know that we had like Ubisoft, for example, having all of that extra like statistics and things like that to kind of like give an idea of what disabled gamers and what audience that they're catering to with this accessibility. But I still see like there's some issues understanding who is this audience that's going to get these accessibility features. So we'll start with Laura diving into this.
So a couple of things that are still lingering in this regard. A lot of developers who are just starting to get into tackling video game accessibility tend to have often a bit of a one-dimensional view of what accessibility means and what disability means. You see a lot of people who will sort of treat accessibility as a box-ticking exercise. They'll look at the accessibility store tags that PlayStation has available and go, cool, I'm technically doing all those things, that means I'm accessible now. And that can sometimes miss some of the nuances of, is it enough to have subtitles, or are you doing your subtitles with the correct sort of size, contrast, readable font choices? Do you have just one vision in mind for what the user of that setting looks like, or are you looking at a broad picture of the different groups of users who might not be who you're expecting, who will benefit from this setting if it's developed in a broad way? Additionally, I would throw onto there that there's a lot of view of accessibility and disability specifically as being a one-at-a-time situation where disabled people are thought of in a vacuum with the one disability we're thinking about that person having. And that often overlooks the fact that most disabled people have some kind of overlapping condition. Disabilities rarely happen in isolation, and a lot of the way that accessibility needs to be thought about is, are you being accessible for someone who might have more than one of these conditions going on at once, where perhaps their accessibility needs might clash, and is there anything you can do to accommodate people in those sort of Venn diagrams?
Yeah, that's really important to think about, especially the other intersectionalities on top of being disabled with being queer, being a person of color, etc. And socioeconomic status, there's a lot of overlap because we're all very complicated people. But Steven, do you have any thoughts with this one?
Oh, way more time than we have. So
I bet.
The truth of the matter is, I'm gonna kind of say a thing I probably shouldn't. My board will be mad at me. Is that a lot of it's political climate. A lot of it is companies are canceling their DEI budgets. and it is hitting us hard. I will be launching a fundraising campaign for Able Gamers in a few months, where I'll be reaching out to content creators that know me and are friends. Because we need help. The money's disappearing because suddenly it's not cool to do DEI anymore, and so the money vanishes, and suddenly accessibility doesn't matter as much anymore. And disability is a really weird minority, because we're the only minority that has absolutely every single other minority within it. We have every single minority out there that you can name. There's somebody in the disability community everywhere. So it's for us. It continues to be a frustration point where developers get caught, where the devs themselves very, very much care about accessibility. I have friends who are like, how do I do better descriptive audio? How do I do better with mouse control? How do I do better with, allowing people with autism play my game? And I can tell them, and they'll go and pitch the ideas, and then the upper ups go, you know what? All right, you get 6 of those options. The other 95, maybe later. And then the developer goes, how do I pick which 6 get in? And then they get caught. So a lot of it is this weird, back and forth we've got of politicalness, and we all hope that politicalness isn't in games, but I'm telling you it is, and it knocks out budgets. So the devs are very much hamstringed on what they can do for the accessibility community.
Olivier.
Yeah, here I think we indirectly touched the subject of representation of disabled persons in companies, in games, of course, but also in companies, and having people who you work with who are disabled is a lot more relatable than having, an abstract person in mind about what is disability and how does that translate into gaming. So if you work with people around yourself who have a set of disabilities that you can understand more closely, it makes it a lot easier to have this buy-in by management. And of course, having disabled people in positions of power in companies is extremely helpful. I can think of, for instance, Microsoft, whose CEO is very directly concerned by disability, and that's why Microsoft is so powerful in the realm and so proactive in the realm of accessibility, because simply the big boss is someone who is really aware of disability from personal point of view. So that's really something that's completely related. Representation, ableism in the society, and of course in the work environments, are completely related to accessibility, or I should say lack of accessibility in games. So that's a really societal issue that we need to address. We can't only get it from the point of view of accessibility, so it's a larger subject than that.
And I think that we are almost at time, unfortunately. I know that this is such a
Already?
big topic. Yeah, it goes by so quickly. I know that this is such a big and important topic, but I know that all of you talk about this more so on the internet. So for the folks that are watching part of the online summit, we will do our outros, and also where people can find you on the internet to hopefully maybe even reach out if that's something that you would prefer, or access your content about accessibility. So we'll start with Steven and go in reverse order.
Yeah, sure. So you can find Able Gamers at Absolutely Able Gamers on every social media ever created, and 3 that haven't been announced yet. And you can find me at Steven Spawn, spelled like StevenSpohn, on literally almost all of the social medias. As far as an outro goes, I just appreciate everyone being here today and thinking about accessibility. We don't think about it enough, and I think having a seat at the table at conferences like the amazing Black Girls Gaming Conference is amazing. Thank you for inviting us, and I hope everyone goes out there and thinks about disabled community members.
Yeah. And Laura?
I can be found basically everywhere on the internet at Laura K. Buzz. If you check out youtube.com/Laura K. Buzz, you will find over 200 episodes of accessibility, giving you little 10 to 20 minute snippets of here's an idea about accessibility, take this and run with it, as well as a few months of episodes of Control Alt Access, which is myself and another creator called Arevia doing twice a month hour-long accessibility news updates and review impressions. Laura K Buzz pretty much everywhere. You'll find all of that stuff. Feel free to email laurakbuzzofficial@gmail.com if you are interested in any consulting work or just have any questions. And lastly, I would just like to mirror what Stephen said. Thank you so much for the invitation. This has been really lovely.
And Olivier.
Yeah, I need to speak after two of the biggest rock stars of the domain, so it feels a bit unfair. I'm only on LinkedIn. You can find me with my first name and last name plus accessibility. My name is not uncommon in France where I live, but having accessibility is so rare that you should find this way. And yeah, I'm always happy to speak with anybody, to talk with anybody about accessibility. I'm passionate about it. So send me a message, call me, and we can have a chat, even though it's not just, you're just having this nice conversation. I'm always happy to share insights and so learn from people I talk to about their progress making games. And that's always interesting and productive.
Well, thank you so much, all three of you, for this amazing panel. It's been a pleasure to moderate you. And for folks at home, I'm Jade Valkyrie. I'm a proud BlackGirlGamer member, and I'm also a content creator. So you can find me at Jade Valkyrie most places. If you want to support a disabled Black Girl Gamer in content, I'm your gal. But thank you so much for hanging out with us, and please stay tuned. We have plenty more content for this online summit. So bye-bye.